say, well, that's a trade. They should automatically have that. What electrician doesn't have X, Y, and Z? Doesn't matter. If you are not providing those tools, you need to pay them. You know, you have to make sure that you're paying them at least double the minimum wage. Yes, ma'am.
So the uniforms, if you require like the receptionist to wear a white shirt and black pants, you have to provide that. Does that have to be a certain style?
Great question. If it doesn't have a company logo on it, or you're not requiring any kind of distinctive color or pattern or designer, say for instance, then no, you do not have. So what it would be industry standard. Okay, so industry standard for a waiter or a waitress would be a white blouse or shirt, black bottoms. If you're not saying, well, they've got to be Dickies and they've got to be this, you know, fabric and all this kind of stuff, then you do not have to provide it. If you are saying it has to be distinctive, it has a company logo, or even in a case where, like, let's say there are certain restaurants that say, oh, you know, a Hawaiian shirt. I think the islands, they require their employees to wear Hawaiian shirts and khakis. That's not industry standard. So they would have to provide that Hawaiian shirt. Does that make sense? All righty. And if any time I see like a deer in the headlights look, I'm going to stop and read because that happens to happen a lot. So I'll re-explain it. You know, there are no silly questions. I understand. I do this stuff every day, all day. So for me, I just ramble it off, and I understand that it's like Greek to you. Yes?
So if you require your employees to wear a shirt with a logo, you have to pay for the shirt, and you have to pay to have it laundered too?
Great question. Now, you have to pay to maintain that shirt as long as you're providing enough shirts for those individuals to be able to change. So a good rule of thumb is if you're requiring 5 days a week, you're going to want to provide at least 3 shirts for that employee, and then they can launder it themselves. So no, under those circumstances, no. But you know, certain companies will have uniforms that are laundered and provide that service. It depends on the situation. Yes.
If you require an employee to buy a tape measure, $5 tape measure, they have to be paid double.
Well, that would be something if you're requiring them to buy that. I mean, that's part of a tool, if you will. That would be a tool they might have to use. But you could, if you are even if it's $5, you could get yourself into hot water. That would be something that, as a regular course of doing business, I would just probably pay the $5 for the tape measure and allow the employee to have it, rather than get myself in a sticky situation where I have to pay double the minimum wage because someone says, "Hey, you're making me buy this particular item."
Double minimum wage for how long?
For the length of their employment, as long as they're having to, if they have to provide their own tools. All righty. So let's talk about another case. This was regarding reporting time pay and split shift pay. This is Alman versus AirTouch Cellular. Employees were asked to come in for a 1-hour meeting and then report to their regular work again later in the day. So what they say, the Department of Labor says about reporting time pay is if an employee comes to work expecting to get their regularly scheduled hours, so let's say for instance, this person normally works 8 hours in a day, and the employer says, well, we don't have 8 hours worth of work, we're going to send you home. You have to give them what's called reporting time pay. The way it works is reporting time pay is on an 8-hour shift, you would give them half of the time that they were expecting. So for 8 hours, reporting time pay would be 4 hours. Now let's say if there was a 10-hour shift, it would still only be 4 hours. The way the regulation works is no more than 4 hours, no less than 2, okay? So if you had a part-time employee who was working only 4 hours in that day and you put them to work for less than that 4 hours, let's say that you only had an hour's worth of work, you would owe them for 2 hours. Does that make sense? So no less than 2, no more than 4. That still works if it's a 3-hour shift. You can't give them half the time, if you will. It's, well, it's 3 hours, I'm going to give you an hour and a half. No, you have to give them at least 2, no less than 2, no more than 4. Yes, ma'am?
What if an employee comes in for an hour and goes home sick? Are you required to pay in 2 hours?
No, thank you. Great question. So if the employee comes, in and says, I'm not feeling well, they work for half an hour or so, no reporting time pay. It is when the employer fails to give the employee the regularly scheduled hours, that the employee showed up thinking that they were going to work. Okay, yes?
And that would be the same thing for a substitute. If a substitute is home in for assignment that's a 6-hour position, get there to the job, and they find out they didn't need that sub for the day, so that substitute would be entitled to 2 hours.
That substitute would be entitled to 3 hours, actually, 3 hours in that case, because they were expecting to work a 6-hour shift. If you are telling that employee, and this is kind of based on this particular case, if you're telling that employee that they are going to have a regular schedule, or you call them up and say, I need you to come into work for 6 hours, and they're expecting 6 hours of work, and then lo and behold, you say, oh, wait a minute, I messed up. Sorry, I only needed you for 2 hours. You would have reporting time pay issues in that case. Yes?
What if you throw it out there and say who wants to go home early and they volunteer to leave?
That's a different story. If you are, asking for volunteers and they want to go home early, then no reporting time pay, because they are saying on their own that they want to go home early.
And when you say regular schedule, do you mean permanent schedule, or what if it changes weekly?
It's whatever even if it changes weekly, they still are given a schedule at the beginning of the week. They know exactly what they're going to be coming in to work. You should never have a circumstance where employees are just showing up, and we actually had that case with a car wash, and Scott can kind of talk about that, where the car wash said, well, we just won't have schedules. We'll just have everybody show up to work, and if we put them to work, great. If we don't, no. In that particular case.
In that particular instance, the state of California took an average of what they ended up working. So they actually went to 8 hours is what the average was, and they said that they were all owed half of their show up time, and they went back 3 years, and this was huge. So please be very careful with that. You're better off to have them come in, and with car wash, we tell people is if it's a rainy day, set up a program to where they have to call in ahead of time if there's rain or something in the weather, so that you can tell them prior to them showing up that they don't have to come in. Because once they put their foot on the property, they're there and you own that money. Then if you do need to send them home, then you come up with a volunteer program. Please, does anybody want to go home? Otherwise, we're going to have you, mop the stalls or something. You can come up with an absolutely repulsive job for them to do, as long as it's, within reason. And then they can volunteer to stay or go home. If they decide to leave, then you're okay. Does that make sense?
I see.
I was just going to say I work for a small family business, and how does this protect the employer? What if the business is slow?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. And it's not designed to.
It's not designed for the employer.
Yes, sir.
What if it was disciplined? Came to work, worked an hour, and did something, and you sent them home for the day?
The same thing still applies. It also applies for when you're terminating an employee as well. So if that employee comes in and they have no clue that they're going to be terminated that day, you call them in at the beginning of the shift and you say, listen, you know what, we've decided to end our employment relationship. You would still have reporting time pay issues if they were expecting to come in to work a regular shift. Many times what employers will do is they usually suspend employees prior to, so they can do some investigation, prepare, make sure that they have all their ducks in a row before they terminate that employee. And then what they can say is, listen, what I need you to do is come in for a meeting. That meeting might be, an hour or two long. And in this case, this is what this gentleman sued for, which is I think I should be entitled to reporting time pay for coming into a scheduled meeting. And what the Department of Labor said is, and the court said, no, you are not entitled to reporting time pay for a scheduled meeting as long as that meeting time is predetermined and as long as that employee is in attendance of that meeting for at least half that time. So for instance,